let's move on. We're gonna move on to angry as heck in Ann Arbor, because I'm not gonna swear. All right.
Okay.
It's H-E double hockey stick. Angry as heck in Ann Arbor.
Mm-hmm.
And Angry says, I am about to close on my new home in Saline. The seller did not provide some documents to the mortgage company, which has delayed the closing by 5 days. Now the seller does not want to close, saying that I missed the closing date and that I am in breach of the contract. I am ready to close, and I found out that the seller has now put the home on the market for $20,000 more than my offer. Angry in Ann Arbor.
Wow, it's unusual, but not I guess not really that unusual. Property values are going up, and people might think that they're missing out. So a seller's trying to back out of a deal, and they're trying to blame the buyer. But you know what I heard was that, and this is according to this person who wrote in, what I really heard is that it's the seller who's the cause of the delay.
Mm-hmm.
The seller can't take advantage of their, can't use an event that they created to then call a contract in breach.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what they call like inexcusable delay. It's actually a legal theory. So you can't use, in the law, you have to have, for lack of a better analogy, you have to have clean hands when you're trying to invoke the benefit of the law.
Mm-hmm.
That means you can't be the cause of the problem and then benefit off the problem, right? Okay. If you're the cause, you don't have any grounds in the court unless it's just absolutely justified. But in this situation, I'm only going based on what she wrote or he wrote, and that would be, like I said, like an inexcusable delay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the cause is for the delay, but if the buyer was ready to close, hey, if somebody was going to give my client who is a buyer a problem like that, I have no problem going to court for them, okay? Because the seller is delayed and it's within the time to close is still a reasonable time frame, which gets us to another thing. We shared this a couple of weeks ago. This is why when people write up a contract regarding closing times, you do not put a definitive date, such as to close on this date.
Yep.
Things happen. So the way to get around this, listen, who's watching, anybody watching and who's a real estate investor, this is worth the time. You put in that closing clause, the date of closing, to be on or about.
Yes.
You don't say close on this date, because if something happens and that closing doesn't occur and there's no addendum extending the closing date, guess what? The parties are out of contract, and if somebody doesn't want to close, they don't have to, unless they're the cause of why the transaction did not close. Okay.
Yep.
So the safe way to do this, we've talked about this, is you go on or about. Okay. On or around. Why? Because it gives you at least a week more. Some say 2 weeks. I've seen some court cases that say, look, on or about means up to 2 weeks from the day of closing. Now that's just the judge's interpretation. That's why you never want to go to court and fight this stuff, because you never know what you're going to get from a judge. Another judge in another courtroom might say, no, on or about's a week.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's so many facts that, a judge would take into consideration to see if that closing date is reasonable. But on or about is looser and gives you more time to come to the table without having to worry about the other party trying to, sabotage or just pull the rug out from underneath you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? It's a great question. I feel bad for that person. But if the seller's going to give them problems, go to an attorney, because I believe, based on what she wrote, she's within, or he's within their rights to demand performance. We call that specific performance. Okay.
Yeah, and it's very suspicious to me, especially since it says, the seller did not provide documents, it delayed the closing, right. And now they are so quick to put it back on the market for $20K more. That seller, to me, that suspect of the seller purposefully delaying so that they could push it past the contract date, because they I'm completely speculating or reading into it, but they've got somebody else in their ear perhaps their listing agent advising them, and not, you know, not an attorney, or maybe their neighbor or their mom or whatever.
Agreed.
Completely speculating, but telling them like, hey, just push it past, you know, the date that's here on the contract, and then the contract is just null and void, and you can do whatever it is that you want, because, you know. So anyway, that's just really suspect to me as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that fact pattern's pretty not good for, it sounds like not good for the seller. Let me tell you that a lot of times people think they can get away with stuff, right? And I really don't know what the percentage is. I have no idea, because you know, we don't know every problem, right?
Sure.
But I always say, like, when people come in, or like this lady or gentleman, I always say that people think they can get away with anything until they have somebody out there who says, no, you can't. Like, if it's legitimate, you know, to me, I always think it's like 10% of the people actually raise their hand when they've been abused legally or financially, and they say, I'm not going to put up with this anymore. I don't know really what the statistics are. I think the ABA says it's like 40% of the people. I did. There was a study the American Bar Association a couple years ago did. That's why don't you go get legal help? They asked, you know, the general public, and those people who responded. Out of those people who responded, 40% of the people said, I didn't think I had a case.
Okay.
Seriously, pick up the phone. They didn't even, you know, pick up the phone and call.
They didn't even try.
Right. There's a lot of people who don't try. You know, there's a lot of people who think, well, I can't afford it. I understand that, but there's a lot of good attorneys out there that will work with people on payment plans, etc. There's a lot of different avenues to be able to make payments, etc. So at least find out if you have a case, you know? So what happens is, in this situation with this lady or gentleman, they think, you know, these realtors think, oh, we can get away with it, until they can't, until they run into people like myself or other highly skilled, risk of studying minus, other experienced attorneys who know what the hell they're looking at. And it's in every area of the law. It's not just in real estate. People are always trying to get away with stuff. And until you, as the recipient of some bad deal, put your foot down and say, enough, I'm not going to, you know, this is not correct, they're just going to roll over you. They're going to steamroll over you until you say no. And so I have quite a few, in real estate especially, people are always being swindled. There's always fraud, or always like weird ass things that happen. And I love that. That's my favorite part of my practice, is that when I find something that somebody's trying to pull, you know, to get away with and usually take advantage of, it's usually women and older people. I love getting the paperwork and then emailing or sending a letter to the other side and going, hey, how you doing? I'm here.
That's fantastic.
It's a good feeling. So I feel bad for them.